This video is going to look at the difference between what's known as block elements and their related inline elements. These make up the bulk of the content in terms of HTML elements that we use. There are other families of elements, but inline and block are the core ones. So first of all, block elements. These are for things like general formatting, like paragraphs, divs for logical divisions, line breaks, for headings, for lists and for tables. And what distinguishes a block element from an inline element, in that block elements force by default the content to appear on a new line. The difference with inline elements is that they do not force a new line, so they flow from left to right across the page. So let's tick some of these off. Paragraphs, these are just P for paragraphs, and that text indicates a paragraph. You can't nest one paragraph inside of another. The content of the paragraph is just the paragraph itself. You could have links or inline elements inside of it, but you don't put paragraphs inside of paragraphs. You might want a line break, and that's just a standalone element like a line break. So if I have a look in this little example here, I've put in a P for paragraph. I'm using Visual Studio Code, so it means I can just type P and hit tab, and then I could have some text like so. So that's a simple paragraph, and if I just want to view that, I'll copy that path, stick it in the browser window, and there's our paragraph. Simple. Okay, other features are we can use the headings, the heading hierarchy. So these are heading elements, H1 through to H6. H1 will represent the most important heading in that part of the document, and you have a hierarchy down to H6. Really useful for search engine optimization purposes. So you see in my test file I'd already got a H1, and I might have a H2 for a subheading. And what these will look like by default is they will go down in size. So a H3 would be even smaller, so that would be a subheading. So like you would do in Word or other word processors, what you're doing is you've got a heading hierarchy here that represents the different headings in your document. Their appearance, you can make their appearance look different. That's the role of CSS. So in theory your H1 could actually be smaller than the H6, but these are semantics, so it's about meaning. So the H1 is the most important heading in any given section of the document. Divs are a little bit more abstract. They are short for logical divisions, and they're mainly used for breaking the page up into a series of logical chunks. And then when we apply styling to them, it's the way that we can lay out the page. So divs in themselves don't do anything particularly exciting. I could put a div here and place it around my existing content, so I have a closing element down there, and it just provides a box in which that content could be placed, and at a later stage I could apply some styling to that. So you'll see that when I look at that page, it's not really going to make much difference. If I had a div inside of that, which is perfectly valid to do, and I won't put a paragraph in, but I'll just put some text in to illustrate the point, that would appear on a new line. Semantically, you'd be better to put that in a paragraph though, because div is just short for logical division. You're dividing the page up into chunks, but what I've got here is another paragraph of text, so therefore I should really place it inside of a P for paragraph tag, like so. Okay, doesn't really affect the appearance of the document, but I do have an underlying structure that if I choose to, I can use to style that part of the document. Lists consist of a UL and an LI, so these are block elements again. So you might have a UL to indicate that you've got a list. So if I hit tab there in Visual Studio Code, it's going to put the closing element in there for me, and then a LI would be a list item, and you can populate that so you get bullet points appear in your page. They'll look like bullets by default. We can use CSS, more on that later in other movies, to actually style them up, but that's what they'll look like by default. So you can see that they're block elements, they're forcing the content to appear on new lines. You do have a variant of this called OL, which would make it an ordered list, so you would have numbers rather than bullets, but all of that can be controlled via styles anyway. Tables are used for presenting data, the idea being you have a table tag that indicates the extent of the table, then you have a row, and then inside of the row you can have a TD that represents the table data, so that would be the row of the table there, and that would be another row of the table there with 1, 2, 3 cells in each. Notice the variant on TD is TH, that indicates it's a table header. So that little lot there, if I place that inside of my document, would give me a simple table. It's not going to appear styled in any way, but it gives me, you can see the table is being used to structure that. I can see the table there, and there is each of the rows, and in each of the rows there are the different cells. A bit bigger, so there's the rows, and then there's the cells inside of them, and the THs are, it's semantics to do with meaning, so you're indicating to screen readers and assistive technologies that they are represent table headers. Okay, so they are the core block elements. There are other ones. Inline elements, these flow from left to right, so you don't get a new line by default. There's a common theme here, all of this is changeable by CSS. More on that in later movies. So a classic one would be the likes of bold, so we can apply that with strong, so that if I move that around, the word is there, that is going to appear bold. If I refresh, I need to save it, just save, go back, refresh, you can see that that now appears bold. So you see that it didn't put that onto a new line because this is an inline element, it flows from left to right, therefore it doesn't force that word is to appear on a new line. Other common ones, so strong is used to give strong emphasis to content, it makes it bold by default. EM is in effect italics, and it will italicize it, and again it will give it an emphasis. These are emphasis in terms of screen assistive technologies rather than bold and italic. They do that by default. You can use B and I if you want, they're both the same, but these are the elements that are recommended. A will create a link, more on that later. Span is an inline element that flows from left to right, but you won't see it have any impact on the appearance of the document because we need to bring style sheets into the mix. So I can put a span tag around something, it will have little impact until we look at adding styling to it. It just provides a container around that word another, so that at a later date I may choose to style it. So I can't even see it's in there visually, but if I right click and inspect, I can see that yes, there is a span tag around that, and that gives me flexibility to style that up differently if I choose to at another point. So headlines, HTML block elements flow down the page, HTML inline elements flow left, right across the page, but be aware that with CSS it gives you all the power to change this, to do to change inline elements to block and vice versa, as well as some hybrids in between. More on that in another movie. Thank you.